Hi, I'm Regan Robinson, your host of Future Fit, the only podcast unraveling the secrets of how the world's most innovative leaders stay future ready in a fast-paced world. I've spent over 20 years as a futurist and strategist, transforming top global brands and putting investment-backed startups on paths to sustainable growth. Along the way, I've become obsessed with new ways to prepare for the future, because thinking about the long term once a year simply isn't enough. In each episode, I talk with movers, shakers, and path breakers who share their stories about how they turn uncertainty into their strategic advantage. Throughout our journey, we'll discover unconventional and imaginative ways to help you thrive today while leading your teams into tomorrow. Future Fit leaders know that being prepared for what's next is more than a business decision. It's a way of being. Let's venture together as we co-create a new future readiness playbook. The future can't wait, and neither can I. So, are you ready to get future fit? So today I am thrilled to welcome Abram Sirignano, an innovative leader who's passionate about combining world-class service and product design, strategy, and engineering talent with human experience challenges we're solving. Abram is renowned for his expertise in turning ideas into action for brands and is the senior partner and global lead of the experience and innovation practice at Profit, a global consulting firm that helps leaders unlock uncommon growth. With over 600 strategists, data analysis, marketers, digital experts, and creatives, Profit has worked with the world's most successful companies, including CVS Health, Marriott, and Netflix. I love this part. Abram blurs the lines between human-centered concepts, business cases, and implementation plans, and pairs clients with profiteers to co-create innovative product and service visions and take them to market. Oh, and I love this part too. Abram is a lifelong detective of why people think, feel, and act the way that they do, and is proud to have collaborated with brands such as Bose, the U.S. Marine Corps, and Sprint to drive business impact and change how people live and work. And because Abram is an intuitive thinker who finds the big picture, I'm incredibly excited to hear what he has to share with us. And with that, welcome to the show, Abram.
Thanks for having me.
Thank you for joining me. Okay, so let's get this party started with the question that I pose to all of my guests, which is, what does future ready mean to you?
The thing that none of us are ever going to be.
Please continue.
It's a wonderful question. It just makes me go straight to our humanity. I think it's what we all want desperately to be and never will quite be. So maybe it's about, one, letting ourselves off the hook a little bit, vulnerable, and accepting that whatever we think we've gotten ready for, we're probably over-prepared in some ways and under-prepared in others. And we've probably thought of the right things in some ways and completely unanticipated others. And so future ready maybe is about being ready to change on a dime and be ready to incorporate something new that's surprising, and being ready to go right back to learning again, because being future ready is probably about being in kindergarten every day.
Yeah. I love that because I think it speaks to the truth of the matter, which is it's not something that you do once and you're good to go and you don't have to think about it again. It's actually, as we were talking about in our warm-up chat, it's a capacity. It is a mental, physical, emotional capacity that you can either embody or you don't, right? And it takes practice, just like working out, horseback riding for me. I just started cantering in the last couple lessons, which I'm very excited about. But like, these things take practice and work. And I love your provocation that maybe we are not actually ever truly, totally future ready, because it's a journey. It's not a destination. And yeah, I think the vulnerability aspect that you mentioned is important. The humility, I would say, if anybody says they can predict the future, run, because nobody can.
Yeah,
right?
I think that's totally right. And there's one other interesting component here, which is, there's a lot of ways in which people want to be bombastic and declare trends and declare that they can see things and sort of present in a way that they've got the signals controlled and they've tapped into something that the rest of us haven't. To your point, I do get quite impatient with that kind of framing or that kind of motion because I think a lot of the work that at least I'm doing with teams and with clients is focused on letting go. It's being non-deterministic. It's declaring that we probably understand very, very little, and a ton of what's going to happen in the future is indistinguishable from random chance. I don't mean to set your audience off on this path of, so it's hopeless, we should just do nothing.
No,
There's
I
absolutely
don't.
no ways to do this, but it is a
Yeah.
start.
Yeah, but and that wasn't even my takeaway. What's coming up for me is like information is abundant, right? And everybody has access to it. And so that's actually not the value add. The value add is how you harness your intuition and your imagination and how you start to connect dots and how you start to see things that people aren't seeing. Right. And so I tend to share with you. I mean, there are areas that I focus on as a futurist, sort of like big bucket, sort of macro things that I look at. I try to make sure AI never comes up on this podcast because it's like, it's not about that. Right. Tech is trendy, FYI. Like it totally is. It's going to go out of style and a new skirt, AKA technology, is going to come in fashion. And so I'm more looking at the human aspects, the fundamental human truths, and the mindsets of people. And so I think that's a good transition into my next question, which is really around intuition. I loved how you said you're an intuitive thinker. As I said, future readiness, it's a state of being, and it's about cultivating a mindset that really embraces change, what you were talking about before, and lifelong learning. And I love intuition because it really adds a unique and a valuable dimension to understanding and shaping your company's future, for example. For example, intuition is really useful when sensing potential risks and opportunities that may not be evident through data and quantitative analysis, right? It also helps you make decisions in uncertain conditions, which is the case when you're dealing with the future. And so as someone who is a proponent of intuitive thinking, I'm curious, what practices or habits keep your intuition sharp, and how do they influence your approach to envisioning what's next in your work?
What a great one. So I try to practice thinking about what's likely to not be thought of. So when people get into a problem space or a question space, the first thing I'm doing in my head is, what are we not doing right now?
Mm-hmm.
And I'm always off in that corner. And there's an associated mental model, which is, if I had no power in this space or were disconnected from this space, but wanted to move into it, what would I do? Which is almost like startup thinking or encumbered by having a monopoly thinking. It's always trying to come at the space that we are in from an outsider's perspective.
Yeah.
I knew nothing about this. What would I not assume? If I'm inside the space, what don't I know that I need to know? So it's a lot of the trying to switch perspective, to walk up to something from a totally different angle. That mental practice, how would somebody else see this? What would they intuit about it? What would they assume? What would they not assume? The getting out of my own skin and getting out of the team's forced perspective is the number one thing I do.
Yeah. So it sounds like counterintuitive, nonlinear, contrarian thinking is something that is that influences your approach in your work. What I deliberately learning and engaging in activities completely outside your field or what sounds like it's important. And that actually stimulates parts of your brain. As I call it imagination training. Like we know this from neuroscience and cognitive science. I could nerd out on the brain all day. Right, because it fosters new neural connections that can enhance intuitive thinking. Like when my mom was diagnosed with cancer and I learned everything about cancer and chemotherapy, how I was actually able to apply things that I used when I was in the agency world, even documents, and I reapplied them to fighting cancer. And then that even just learning about all that, just what it did to my brain and how it sparked, again, these new neural pathways. I think people really underestimate the power of getting outside your comfort zone continuously, maybe because it's scary. But the thing is that if you just do even in a small way daily, like that, I believe can compound over time.
Totally agree with you.
Yeah. And I think the other thing about like maintaining a sharp intuition for me, I don't know if you share this, but it's like that, and by engaging in diverse perspectives, like you said, and doing reflecting is then you kind of move through the world with this like hyper awareness that I think is really potent, especially when you're trying to envision all of the future's possibilities.
You just raised a really important point. I think intuition also depends on actively receiving the world around you versus having a very strong immediate idea and looking for confirmation.
Yeah. Oh, yeah.
It's like the difference between people who are listening to you, but what they're really doing is forming their argument or rebuttal versus they're really listening to you. And they're going to get to the end of whatever you're saying, and then they're going to think for a little while. There's this interesting thing. I will sometimes be paused for a little bit of time after somebody else is done speaking, and they will wonder, "Are you okay? Like,
Yeah.
do you need to like clarify? Are you
Yeah.
confused?"
Silence makes them uncomfortable.
Yeah, and I'll say, I'm thinking about what you said, and I'm trying to figure out what's the best thing for me to respond with because there's a lot of options. And that's also takes some training, but I think it goes straight to intuition, which is if you take in some signals and then you let them sit for a little while and you go, what are different ways in which these signals might mean something? You'll actually come up with options, and then you'll have the very fun problem figuring out, now, how might I experiment against these options or decide what to do with them? And it's the same thing in a simple back and forth in a conversation. There's the linear way, which is I have an agenda and I want to drive it. There's the nonlinear way, which is how do we have a great dialogue?
Yeah. Yeah. I think that's really important. And the other, you said one of my trigger words, which is, well, you've said two of them so far. Good trigger. Good trigger for me. Sorry, good trigger. Let me clarify. Assumptions and biases. Because a lot of the work that I do, that's actually where I start with people is we've got an assumption bust. We have to, what kind of cognitive biases are we up against? There's over 200 cognitive biases that influence how we think about the future. That in and of itself, that sheer number should teach us some humility and how we're not aware, right? Unless you are really intentional about being aware and you are intentional with these practices but then that's when you're intuitive, you're creative, and you're innovative, and you're imaginative superpowers, just like watch out, right?
I totally agree with everything you just said. I think that there's so much there that we could actually unpack for hours. I want to add one other little thing, and this comes from my dear friend and colleague, Tony Frost. So I have to credit him. There's a huge importance to practicing avoiding moving straight to convergence. Just keep it at bay. If you want to have strong intuition, you need to stay in active divergence for a fair amount of time. And even when you need to start to converge down to, okay, we have to make some decisions, we have to prioritize some things, we have to make some bets, we have to experiment. I think you still want to leave open the possibility that you'll have to diverge based on new signals.
Yeah, I love that. Now, we talked about vulnerability a bit a moment ago, and I'd love to dig in a little bit more. So vulnerability can be a catalyst for future readiness because it forces you, you said it earlier, but I'm going to say it again, it forces you to acknowledge that nothing can be predicted or controlled but yourself. right? And it also, that's the truth, everybody. And it also allows you to tap into emotional intelligence, or this intuitive edge that we've been talking about, making you more perceptive to shifts in the market or consumer behavior. Now, you've talked about the critical role that vulnerability plays in an innovation context. Now, I'm going to paraphrase you here, but you've said that it's first about belief, conviction, and possibility. Second, it's about unlearning the behaviors of speaking uncertainties and absolutes and moving to vulnerable language. I love that. It is brilliant. So, how are you fostering a culture of vulnerability within your team, and what impact has this had on your ability to adapt and innovate?
So your audience might benefit most from a macro and a micro version of the answer.
Let's do
So
it.
macro, I think my work is most inspired by the broad notion of bringing the risk tolerance and portfolio thinking and doing from venture capital to corporates.
Mm-hmm.
And the reason I say at the macro level is because a corporate enterprise needs deterministic thinking and doing to deliver on required margin against its businesses and market activities. So it's really easy in the corporate context. Let's not blame anybody. They're doing the right thing. They're thinking linearly from what they've got available to them in their value chain and their market activities and what they've got to deliver. And if they're publicly traded, it's wound around the quarterly earnings cycle. So no surprise.
Yeah.
And yet, they're all terrified of those franchises disappearing over 5, 10, 15, 20 years, or maybe even sooner in some cases, where they could see margins eroding, they could see revenues eroding. It's not a great situation in some cases.
Mm-hmm.
So if you think about VC thinking at the macro level, VC thinking is, I could, just to create the thought experiment, I could have 99 bets fail and make up for that with one winner.
Right.
Because the one winner can return 10x, 30x, 50x, 100x. And so a lot of the sleeping at night is around long time cycles and spreading the bets out and letting intuition be a part of that process in terms of the relationships with founders, really liking how they move in the world, feeling confident they've been successful before, with the thesis you've got around how the world's going to change, and then you're not going to get it all right.
Right.
So that at the macro is, how do I bring that thinking into the corporate environment? How do our teams bring that thinking and make it palatable to corporate thinking and doing? That's macro.
Yeah.
Micro, how do you bring the vulnerability in? Fundamentally, it's about understanding that there is no such thing really as expertise. We're not expecting you to be a content expert.
Mm-hmm.
We are expecting you to be a process expert.
Mm.
There's ways that we want to move methodically in the work that we're doing that uncovers opportunities, creates the potential for experimentation, helps us understand whether experiments are working, helps us form new thesis areas, those sorts of things.
Yeah.
The content, I don't know what part of the content's right.
Right. Well, it's always changing, right? It's always updating and evolving.
How do we know? And I have no crystal ball. So we're always putting the best thinking we can on the table, and then we're making good decisions with the information we have at the time.
Right.
Where I think you do set rigor is there are specific ways you can do this work that reliably produces low tension, low stress, low burnout, still high intensity, and gives you lots of that optionality we want from that VC portfolio level thinking. Is this making sense at all?
Yeah, no, I'm following. And my question was, do you have any tips or any just an example that you can share?
Oh, sure. So let's say that I am a young person just getting into this. Maybe I've got 10 years of experience. Yeah, I've worked my way up through various, whether I'm a designer or I'm a strategist or an engineer. And now it's time to do this kind of work. And it's my first concept that I'm owning. And I'm thinking about the next 10 years. And a very practical thing is let everybody on the hook, or off the hook rather, on being right.
Yeah.
We have zero control over that. But then start asking yourself, what's the next best thing we need to do? And the very tactical way that ends up working is that it starts from the kinds of questions. This is a very simple technique that we use everywhere.
Mm-hmm.
What question would fail my entire idea?
Mm-hmm.
Answered it in the negative. Go get the best evidence you can against that first.
Yeah.
There's 100 things you can figure out later when you have more confidence. Start with, if this weren't true, this idea is, for now, dead.
Yeah. I love that one. I love that. I love thought experiments, and I love that. It's funny. I do a lot of workshops, and I love playing tricks with people's minds. And really, I ask them to say, for example, what is something that you are absolutely certain that is going to be true 10 years from now? And then it's like that you stump the futurist, and then you go find it. I find evidence, and I'm like, and it's like the aha and sort
Feel
of
so sure?
the mind blown. And I'm talking about like things like people will breathe oxygen in the future, like things that you might think are just like so foundational and fundamental, but yet there is always evidence out there that a different future may come to pass. And so I think to bring it back around to vulnerability and what you're talking about around being open to feedback, being willing to pivot, also admit when a strategy isn't working, and being flexible enough to sort of change direction. Like there's a lot of power in that. And candidly, I don't see as much of it happening as it should, right? Because then we have like fear and ego, two of my other trigger words, getting in the way. But I think that's really important. And I just love that little framework that people can, our audience can use to, again, start training their brain and challenging what is in front of them.
So another little idea for you and the audience that comes from an operating system we have called hypothesis to action, which is a whole nother thing. We borrow a lot of techniques from investigative journalism. So one of the things that we train, and because we do a lot of the work really alongside clients for long periods of time, it's almost like building a cooperating model. Everyone's operating in this environment. We believe very strongly that there are no opinions, only evidence. So similar to investigative journalism, as an example, if you would like to declare you have a finding, there needs to be two independent sources.
Right.
And if you would like to declare a conviction, there have to be multiple findings that support it that are independent of each other.
Right.
And if you would like to declare that you'd like to take an action, that action must be based on a very strong conviction. This laddering of observations to findings to convictions to actions, it grounds the work, because this work can become so abstract and theoretical if you don't.
Yeah. No, I think that's important. And that really resonates with me. I mean, now my work definitely starts in the theoretical, the imaginative, the white space, the blank canvas, whatever you want to call it. Right. But you can't just stop there. You have to be able to have a framework like you just shared for then how, okay, well, now that I use hypotheses, I call them how it could be hypotheses when I'm working with clients. And so we articulate, well, okay, you have to have multiple hypotheses around what the future could be and how it could impact your company. You start with multiple of those, and then we got to go through a process of validating, whittling, getting other inputs and feedbacks. Again, that's where I go back to it's a journey. It's not
Always.
That doesn't mean it can't be done in a short amount of time, but you might have to go back, right? That's why I work in cascades. I don't know about you, because I'm like, sometimes we're over here, we got to go all the way back here, because we learned something as we went further in the journey that either sparked something new, or our hypothesis was here, or we didn't realize we had this assumption. And again, I think that's some really great takeaways for our audience. And speaking of things not it being a journey, this type of work, let's talk about resilience. So resilience is another essential ingredient of the future readiness recipe, because it equips you with this ability we've been talking about to overcome challenges, continuously evolve, and maintain progress in the face of adversity, which, as you and I know, there's going to be a lot of it, right? Now, you authored a report that surveyed 300 global business leaders with innovation responsibilities to understand the connection between innovation and resilience, which found that, unsurprisingly to me, innovation and resilience are inextricably linked. And the report also highlights sort of the tension that exists between innovation and resilience, because many leaders treat them as conflicting priorities. And so I'm curious, what are some commonalities between the most innovative and resilient companies? And what did your research reveal about what leaders should do differently in terms of their approaches?
Wow, two huge topics. I'll try to be brief and we'll make it a dialogue. So uh, on the first one, I think the most common thing is seeing the connection clearly and deploying capital and teams at the intersection so that you don't end up with, for example, uh, teams that are basically doing lab style proof of concepts off in a corner with no real business case associated. And other teams looking to rapidly transform the value chain of a company and how its cost is structured and how it's making money and going into the market. And those things are happening in totally independent ways. And doesn't make a ton of sense. There wants to be a lot of connectivity around, if we're going to go future finding, we're going to try and figure out what might disrupt us in the future. That should be directly related to ongoing transformation, the way that transformation is going to change the company for the better. So yeah, so seeing the connectivity at the level of the budgets and the teams.
Yeah, well, and it's like, you can grow beyond the core. That's what, and you need to continue to reimagine. But also, as you're reimagining, there might be existing assets that you have that then can be reconfigured or redeployed in a new and different way. And so, it's silly to not, okay, well, let's get all the pieces out on the table. We've got the wild ideas over here that we're starting to validate and experiment with. And we've got, okay, we've been making money here, but we're starting to see the declines. Let's get everything out on the table instead of like narrow casting and focusing on one or the other. That's totally one of my biggest beefs is people don't understand the idea of ambidextrous thinking. And you have to be able to hold sometimes even two seemingly opposed concepts in your mind at the same time and still be able to move forward.
Yes. Right? That whole notion of both at the same time. I think you nailed it. That's just so spot on. It is both at the same time. And then on your second question, the real fundamental is top of house leadership being loud and proud in their support of anything that is an innovation activity, and then practicing resilience behavior themselves. So I'll make that super tactical.
Yes, please.
A senior leader, when a team reports a failed experiment, can handle that at least two different ways. There's probably lots of ways, but I'll frame up two that one I like and one that's not so great. So one we really like is applaud and celebrate the successful experiment in how it was conducted and frame how we're going to learn from the poor result. So separate the conducting of an experiment with excellence from data shows that we failed, but we're going to learn from that. And actually, we won because now we know something specific that we didn't know before.
Right.
And that learning is proprietary to us. So separating how you do something from its result. What I don't like so much is when all it's focused on is, well, thank you, we failed. That was a fail fast. We're going to move on. And what's left unsaid is whether or not we think the team conducted an excellent experiment or not, which is demotivating.
Like people just want to move on, right? It's, oh, we failed. Like some people might feel embarrassed because the leadership isn't demonstrating that no, like we need to pause and take a hot second here and talk about this. And this isn't, nobody's going to be in trouble. Like I am a huge fan of postmortems. In fact, I used to run a lot of those in my agency days. And it's funny when I've tried to implement them in mid to, later stage startups, people look at me like I have 10 heads. Like when I maybe bring in drinks or pizza or whatever, I'm like, this is supposed to be kind of fun. I have little dot exercises that we do. It's almost like a game. And when I used to do it, there would be a processing of emotions that actually happens organically that is also important for people to move on, right? To your point, let's learn, let's take the insight, let's take the learning, and let's apply it to what we're doing next, but also having a collective processing, grieving to our warm-up conversation. I'm like, I feel like I'm really good at grieving. Like I just, grieve a lot and then let's do this, like on to the next, right?
You're reminding me of a really important point, which is I think that leaders don't take enough time to explain what they think their theory of success is. My personal theory of success for any business in any context is that market progression or market momentum is the outcome of a million small things that actually went wrong. So I believe under the hood of a company on a tear, like total success, there's just a million things that were actually going wrong, but were quickly identified and course corrected rapidly before they became really significantly damaging.
Yeah.
And so if it were me sitting there saying to a large team how to think about it, it's we want to practice a culture of constantly exposing and calling home early on any little thing going wrong because it will be a part of immediately going more right.
Yeah. That really resonates with me. As I told you earlier, the show is Future Fit, aka Future Fitness, and I draw a lot of analogies between health and a company. Like your company has health too, by the way. Like not just the people in it, but a company is a mental model, right? It is a concept. But guess what? That concept, and as I always say, short-termism is a disease. I have lots of fun little sayings I say because I'm like, you're not looking at, you need to maintain the health of your company. And I think that's what came up for me as you're talking about. You need to like constantly be looking for what are some things that are starting to bubble up that until it becomes full-blown cancer, maybe we can spot this little mole and easily have it removed instead of having melanoma down the road, if you will. Not to bring like a depressing topic up, but so I love that. So as William Gibson famously said, the future is already here. It's just not evenly distributed. And I love this quote because, and I think it speaks to what we've been talking about because it underscores the idea that the future is right in front of us if we're really looking. And Profit is a company that helps leaders unlock uncommon growth that is purposeful, transformative, sustainable. But as you know, this work is not for the faint of heart. And so I'm curious, what gaps or difficulties are you facing when anticipating or strategizing for Profit's future? And what wisdom would you offer for leaders who are struggling with similar challenges?
Be more human. I think everything that we're talking about is about trying to get the best out of ourselves and others. We're not gods. We're never going to suddenly understand what we don't understand right now. It might come to us at some point, but you don't control the how and the when that you suddenly are gifted with insight that you did not have before. You're also not able to totally control evidence and moving from hypothesis to evidence. You also can't control the reality that almost certainly somebody else has the same idea you do and is probably ahead of you on actioning it.
Yeah, probably multiple people.
Without any question at all.
Yeah.
So the best thing that anyone can do is try to get engaged, passionate, skilled, collaborative action from the people around you. And to focus with attention, real attention on issues in an orderly way. Again, starting with the most critical ones. What would fail our entire mindset? Let's start there. Okay, the mindset survived. Great. What's something more pointed and more narrow?
Yeah.
Can that survive? Okay, that survived. Let's keep moving. And you can create progression if you're orderly and thoughtful. And you can create progression if people believe in each other and are rewarded for calling home early and are rewarded for not borrowing accountability and sticking to things that they really own. and know how to lean into each other and practice combined action and the surfacing of problems and thoughts early. I think fundamentally, if that's what you're doing, no matter what your situation is, no matter where you are, no matter what you're trying to do, you're going to perform better.
Yeah, that really resonates with me. And I think what's important for our audience that might maybe move the needle for them just a smidge on this, because a lot of what we're talking about is scary, right? It's scary for most people. You and I, we're over here on the weird side, right? We're the
100%.
outlier, misfit, anomaly. That's how I describe myself. I came out of the womb that, and I still am to this day, right? So right? That is not most people. And so you actually, not throughout our conversation and just in that advice that you were offering, there's some practicality that people need to keep in mind that can be applied to this. It is not all woo-woo wizardry and like there is chaos, but it can be controlled chaos. It can be more guided chaos, right? And the last thing I'll just add is I believe that, true future readiness lies in not having all the answers, but having the courage to ask questions, the resilience to navigate the journey as it unfolds, and asking bold questions. That's come up a lot because those bold questions actually sharpen two vastly underutilized capacities that are the foundation for deep future readiness, which is humility and agility. Like this is all a recipe. There's this like cake, right? That I'm trying to get people, I'm sure you are as well, to take a bite of.
I couldn't agree more. I'll leave the senior most people with a simple thing. It's okay to say you don't understand and to ask why and to say, tell me more about that. And also to say, I'm not sure how that connects to the problem. Those are all wonderful things to say as long as they're not dismissive.
Yeah. 100%. I love that. Now, a final question before you share where our listeners can find you. In your view, is preparing for the future more about managing risks or capitalizing on opportunities?
Back to our thing that we said about 10 minutes ago, it's both at the same time. I think those are both on a wheel and usually are intermingled.
Yes, I love that answer. And that's a totally appropriate answer. And I had a feeling you were going to go there. So funny. I've had guests go, do I have to pick one? I'm like, no. You know.
I also am not really sure I'd say that I could define them separately. I think that in explaining one of them, I would describe the other.
Yeah, that's it. Inextricably entwined is like those are two of the most magical words in the English language. I'm sure you would agree. And with that, where can people go to find out more about you and your work?
I'd say just profit.com. Look forward to seeing you come there. I'm on LinkedIn. That's probably about it.
Marvelous. Thank you so much for your time and your brilliant insights, Abram. It's been enlightening. I've had so much fun, and I would engage in a thought experiment with you any day of the week.
As well, appreciate you.
Thanks for joining us on this episode of Future Fit. If you're listening, you're probably future curious. So follow me in my newsletter on LinkedIn to keep the conversation going and share your discoveries with the Future Fit community. And if you enjoyed this episode, remember to subscribe, rate, and review Future Fit on your favorite podcast platform. Until next time.